Hello, everyone. Welcome to SportsKhabri. With me is a special guest today, Tom Byer, who's heavily experienced in grassroots football. He's worked around Asia, particularly for the longest time in Japan. Thanks so much, Tom, for giving us your time today. And how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for offering to interview me. I'm here in my home in Tokyo on a rainy Friday afternoon, but looking forward to chatting about football.
Awesome. Before we start talking football and everything about football, how did you get into the sport in the first place? Right? Where are you from? How did you end of the football space early on in your life?
Sure. I was born in New York City in the Bronx, but my family moved upstate into the countryside when I was young. And my brother started playing first with friends, family friends. And just kind of as it is natural, I got interested in playing. So I started younger than he did. So I became better than he was. But anyway, I was very lucky because our best friend's family's kid, they all played football. So that was my kind of preferred sport, although I did play other sports as well when I was
Okay.
younger. But football was the one that I became best at.
Any players that you looked up to when you were growing up? Any particular leagues that you were watching?
Sure. I grew up during the era of the North American Soccer League, it was called
Okay.
back then. So I was very lucky. I had the Pele was playing in New York. I'm
Uh-huh.
from New York. We had Johan Cruyff. We
Okay.
had George Best.
Yeah.
So we had some of the greatest players of all time. Eusebio from Portugal, Nene Cubillas from Peru. We had, some of the best players, if not the best players in the world that were playing at the time when I was growing up. So that was very inspirational for me as a kid to watch them play.
Yeah, fair enough. And how did it sort of develop in your early years? Were you regularly playing football and then sort of looked at a professional career in football, or did it was it always in the back of your head even at a young age?
Yes, well, I grew up in upstate New York, and I had the New York Cosmos in New York City playing, and there was a bit of a football boom back in the early days. I'm an old guy, but back in the 1970s. So there was that kind of dream to become a professional footballer. I also had in America, college football or soccer, as they call it there, is very
Mhm.
popular. And I was very lucky because in my community, we had a junior college that was very, very strong football. And most of the players came from European backgrounds from New York City. And so they were also national champions 2 years in a row. So that was a massive, massive influence on my career. I think that if I didn't have that in my community, things might have turned out very differently. And then eventually I would go on to play at that college as well and have I had a very good college career. So early I kind of got the bug, as we say. I got excited and the dream started from a young age.
Tom, while preparing for this, I read that you studied criminal justice growing up. What was that like? It's a little away from football, but how was that
Yeah,
experience?
yeah, that's a good question. I did so because my dad was a police chief in
Okay.
upstate New York. So I was surrounded by policemen and, law enforcement, FBI, investigators, detectives that were all my dad's friends. So, and my dad was at the time very well known law enforcement person in our community. So I studied to become either a policeman or an FBI or something in law enforcement. But obviously, I went a different route because my football career went well, and so I didn't have to put on the hat, the badge, and carry a gun. So things turned out
Yeah.
much differently for me.
So was it something that you liked? Did you have to choose between the two at any point, or was it football always came first?
No, football was always first, but I always did. I had a very serious thought about becoming a policeman when I was
Okay.
younger.
Okay.
So yeah, it's not many people have asked me about that, but I did. I came very, very close. I could have easily
Okay.
become a policeman in those years, but then I got a scholarship. I went down to the University of South Florida and still continued to study criminal justice. But
Okay.
yeah, again, my love and passion was always soccer, football.
What age was this though that you had to decide between the two and you really considered going into law enforcement?
I think when I got to the University of South Florida and I found out that I was a much better football player than a student.
Okay, fair enough. Fair
uh,
enough.
so that was kind of I struggled in school a bit because I wasn't really into studying so much. I was really into playing, and I was very focused on, even if I couldn't play, I wanted to be somehow connected to the game. And as you probably know, of course, my coaching career is much, much, much more well known than my playing career. So I'm very lucky.
But Tom, I mean, you're somebody who's been in the football scene for a long, long time. So is it common for sports persons, particularly footballers, to sort of be better at football than they were at school? Have you encountered situations where somebody was doing really well in school and had to pick that over football?
You know what? I think back in my era, back in the years when I played, there was much more of an emphasis on, if you were going into sports, that you focus primarily on sports. Whereas today, we have a phrase in the US that's called a student athlete. So, yeah, there's a big difference in the generation, I think,
Mhm.
where people weren't as conscious about studying and making sure you had an education, in case you obviously didn't become a professional in any particular sport. Whereas today, a lot of play, at least in America, I mean, it's different world, right? In America, college is still a pathway for soccer players in America, or football.
Right.
It's not so much in other countries,
Mhm.
but a lot of MLS players that play professionally, Americans, a lot of them would probably have college educations. Where it's changing though, different, because in the olden days, which is a very good question you asked, in the olden days, professional football in America, professional soccer, they didn't really have a club structure. It was the
Mhm.
first team, maybe a second team, and then nothing else.
Okay.
But today, all MLS clubs carry a full academy load, under 10s, 12s, all the way up. And so back in the olden days, the best players would have normally gone to colleges and universities, but now they go straight into the MLS in the United States, or at least a majority of them do. So it's a bit different. It's a bit different, different world, different era, different time, different generation.
Nice, nice. Very interesting. I mean, so how was your playing career? You said you're probably known for your coaching career more than your playing career, but how was it to play as a professional athlete? Because I think a lot of athletes treasure their playing days. So how do you look back on your playing days?
Yeah, I was always a struggling professional, player. I got my big break playing here in Japan back in
Mhm.
the mid 1980s. I was at Hitachi, which is owned by Hitachi, but it's the J League club called Kashiwa Reysol. I was their first foreigner to ever even practice there, and so that was a big culture shock for me. But the reality is, back in those days, and pretty much the same for everybody, you know, most people would play for free if they had to, and they couldn't get paid for it. So I was playing in a country, and it's always hard playing in a different country, because you have to be as good or better than all the other players.
Right.
So I played a short stint with Hitachi, but then I got out of playing, and then I got into development, which I really enjoyed, probably as much or maybe even more than playing.
But what is it that drew you to development and say and coaching as such? Because it's not a route that a lot of people choose, and especially in the grassroots levels.
Yeah.
So what drew you to that?
Yeah, because when I was growing up in high school, I had a
Mhm.
lot of good role models as coaches. As coaches in America, there's a massive, massive business for football camps. Okay, camps. Kids go to camps, schools, and things like that. And when I
Mhm.
was in high school, I worked as a assistant coach, as kind of an apprentice, so to speak, in football camps throughout America. And I came in touch and connect with a lot of foreign coaches, mostly from England. So I was starting to see a different culture, a different lifestyle, a different way, different styles of coaching. The camaraderie I really loved. I loved being around the group of other coaches. I loved coaching kids as well. But it was that kind of fellowship that really, really got to me. And I had a couple of key guys that were my mentors that I really, really looked up to, that really looked after me as well. And I cherish those days. And those are, once you're finished playing and you're in a camp environment and you're going out, you're eating together, you're playing foosball together, you're traveling together, you're doing everything. You're sleeping together in the same rooms, the same environment. You're sharing, basically almost 24 hours a day. And I
Yeah.
loved that. I loved that. That was so much fun for me. And so even when I get out of playing, I've had coaching experience where I'm a coach of a team, but I'm much more of what we call a clinician. I'm
Okay.
a demonstrator. I'm a technical expert. That was my field. I'm a technical skills expert. That's what I focus on. And I just loved it, And then here in Japan, I've done thousands of events and training sessions and television and just, you name it, I've done it. Worked with a lot of brands. I've done so many events. I've created, content for DVDs. I've been on television every day. So I really just love that idea of performing and
Okay.
also kind of storytelling as well, because a lot of time when I do my presentations, they're kind of in a story format. It's like a little show for children. You insert a few jokes here and there as well, but it's just to have a good time. And football is the tool, is the vehicle. So that's my way of the way I communicate with people.
But what is it about children that sort of drew you to the grassroots level of football?
Well, I think that again, because when I was a kid, I was around a lot of young kids. Kids are very pure at the young ages. They're playing football because they just love it. They're not thinking about, they're going to make a lot of money and buy a new car and, buy a Rolex watch and, have diamonds and all of that kind of image that we have of these like star athletes that are making millions and millions of dollars. They're in it purely because of the joy of the game, the camaraderie of playing with friends, the competition, everything. So I think that's because of, again, my opportunity and experience of being able to be in that environment in camps and things overnight, staying overnight. That was really kind of the first time that I ever went away and stayed somewhere without my family as well. So it kind of matured me as well to be a little bit more of an adult at a high school age. So it just ticked off many boxes for me.
Right. Tom, I mean, I've got a younger brother. This comes from there. This question comes from there. And we play a lot of sport together. And sometimes there are certain things, technical things that I want to tell him. And sometimes it gets a little frustrating because they're young and I understand that it's hard for them. But how important is it to stay patient? How do you do it? Because sometimes the kids don't do things that what you want and exactly what you're trying to sort of convey to them.
Well, it's a difficult question to answer because it also depends on what the age group is.
Hmm.
Obviously, the younger you get, the bigger the challenge is. The
Hmm.
older you get, it depends on what their level is of what they can teach them above that. Football basically is a very extremely technical sport because it's played with the feet. It takes a ridiculous amount of hours of practice to become good at it.
Hmm.
So at the very youngest ages, the most important element for a child to develop is the ability to focus their attention, to pay attention, to
Okay.
be present at the present moment. And this isn't just for football, but this isn't learning in general.
Hmm.
47% of the daytime of a human being is basically they're not present. They're just,
Okay.
they've got this subconscious mind that is just playing the recorder in their mind all day long. They're either thinking about past or future, but they're not present, right? So
Right.
it's a challenge. And then the bigger challenge that I think as coaches we get is that the older the kids get, often coaches are going to inherit a group of players of vastly different abilities. So you've got
Hmm.
the one or two kids that are really good, you got a couple that are okay, and then the other kid just, they're just starting out. And I've worked at every level of football, at the, professional level. I've been around the national team levels, grassroots kids, things like that. But for me, the most important level for me is the youngest ages. That's if you get that right, if you build that foundation of basic skills, that's when and only when you can start scaffolding and building the more complex, difficult movements in football. And so, it's a challenge. It just depends on what age group, what level you're coaching, and then you have to adapt to it. And you have to have patience, because also kids learn at different levels, different speeds, different times.
Yeah.
Some parts develop quickly, some parts develop less quicker. So it's like kind of being a chef, right? You have to know when you're cooking, okay, do I taste it? Do I need to put a little salt in? Do I need to put a little vinegar in? Do I need to put a little wine in? Do I need to put, whatever it is that you need to put in? And so coaches need to be very flexible. They need to be very open. They need to be lifelong learners. There's not just one way. There's many ways to do things. So that's just kind of a little bit my philosophy on coaching.
What would you say is the ideal age for a kid to sort of start picking up technical abilities in football?
They can start learning as soon as they walk. So again, this is the center of my work today, and that is that with this phrase that I use, football starting at home. So most kids from the countries who develop the best players in the world, they learn those basic building blocks before they join organized play, or before they join a team. And it happens in a very natural, organic kind of environment that's not forced. And then by the time they actually show up to an organized, structured practice, they've already mastered those basic building blocks. And I find that those kids, they develop quite well because they're off to what we call kind of a flying head start. So, the global standard for joining a team is usually around the age of 6 or 7, but kids can start learning to, you see, my whole concept is that from a young age, we never try to force a child to fall in love with playing football. But what we do is we introduce a ball, and it's more likely they'll fall in love with the ball, which will lead to falling in love with playing football. So once they fall in love with the ball, there's all kinds of possibilities. They usually become lifelong lovers of both playing and watching and supporting. But until they get that basic foundation, which many players don't get, by the way, then they struggle. Then they struggle to build the more complex skills that are very difficult to do. And then they hit a wall. And we see that because there's a tremendous amount of children who drop out of football from a young age. See, football's a really super easy sport to just join. Just go. You've got absolutely no skill whatsoever. Just go and show up to your first practice. Almost no sport in the world is like that. And there's different parts, right? Like if you play cricket, you could be the guy who's like throwing the ball. You could be the batter. You could be the guy or the girl who's catching the ball. So you could be better at different parts of the game, right? And because of the hand-eye coordination, many people they developed hand-eye coordination, but everybody's got to use their feet in football, except the goalkeeper, of course. But so that creates a tremendous challenge because more often than not, kids who show up to their first ever practice at 6 years of age, they've maybe never had a ball at their feet. So it's a challenge. So what I say is that parents, if they're knowledgeable, they can help their children get off to a good start. And also, it's a whole different conversation. Ball mastery, as we call it, has a lot of other good benefits. Ball mastery, basically one player manipulating a ball with their feet, keeping it close, controlling it. So that takes a tremendous amount of focused attention to do. So when a child starts developing the ability to focus their attention, they're learning how to learn. The brain is learning how to learn. And that spills into other different disciplines like mathematics or science or knitting or doing anything. So I try to teach parents now that ball mastery is much, much, much bigger and big benefits aside from the football component of it. It's great because it helps to develop better memory, better focus, better concentration, challenging yourself because it's very hard to control a ball with your feet. It's an object, right? So there's some really, really good benefit to conducting ball mastery from a very young age, and it can help all sports as well.
Yeah, fair enough. Tom, are you getting that response from the parents now? Now that you're sort
Oh
of
yeah.
telling them,
I mean, I work all over the world. I'm very lucky. Today, I'm speaking to someone from India. Uh, just a few days ago, I'm speaking to someone from England. A few
Mhm.
days before that, I'm speaking to someone in Australia. Before that, in America. Before that, Germany. I'm global, so I'm very lucky. And I think people are starting to understand. I work with a lot of media companies. I work with different brands. I work with governments, sports ministries, educational ministries, professional leagues, professional teams, federations, state associations, clubs, professional, amateur, and the whole, it's the same kind of focus, and that is that football starting at home is
Mhm.
something good that needs to be part of the developmental culture. And
Okay.
so I go around and I try to create movements centered around football starting at home so that people, and what is culture? Culture is when a community, and it doesn't matter the size, it could be a family, it could be a group, it could be a community, it could be a school, it could be a club, it could be a nation. And culture is when that group, okay, shares similar beliefs, similar values. And for me, what that is in football with ball mastery is that everybody should understand or have the belief and the value in ball mastery, and realizing that the first phase of development for a football player should not be kicking like everybody thinks it is, or shooting the ball in front of a goal endlessly all day. It should be
Mhm.
mastering the ball. And once you master the ball, like for example, in many of the Latin countries where they develop the best players in the world, whether it's the Messis or the Ronaldos or the Neymars, they don't fall in love with football at first. They fall in love with the ball first. So that's something that's a nugget of wisdom that families should understand. And by the way, it also can help to develop your son's or daughter's cognition, their social skills, their emotional skills. Emotion, because when you start out doing something and you fail, but you keep doing it, then you have satisfaction. That's an emotion. That's joy. That's happiness. That's
Okay.
happiness from seeing the fruits of all of the hours that you practice. So that's an emotional skill. And then physical skills as well: balance, coordination, agility, speed. It's got many pluses. So I'm trying to convince the football world to promote football, not just because football's great, it's number one in the world, but all of the side benefits and byproducts that the game can give to people.
Absolutely. Again, just out of curiosity, Tom, can you elaborate a little more on what ball mastery is? In a footballing sense, would that entail largely dribbling, or is it just the focus part of it?
It's basically it's a starting steps for building up to dribbling. It's
Okay.
staying in a stationary area or in a small area and pulling the ball back. Think of these as my feet,
Hmm.
okay? And here we go. So this is the foot. So it's rolling the ball back and forth. It's pulling it back, going in a different direction. It's pulling it and then turning your body using your right foot, left foot. It's basically transferring the ball from your right foot to your left foot to your right foot, 360 degrees.
Okay.
And and when you look at the best players in the world, usually you'll see their mastery of the ball is unbelievable. The
Right.
Messis, the Ronaldos, the Neymar, uh, Iniesta, Xabi, just all the greats, right? And
Yeah.
so that's very important, and that's a building block. That's a
Right.
building block that once you have it, you've got it forever. It's
Right.
deposited in the brain. The part of the brain that's responsible for ball mastery is called the cerebellum.
Hmm.
The cerebellum is, regardless whether it's a mental test, physical test, it's stored in the cerebellum. It's stored in what's called the non-declared memory. Non-declared memory, where you do something so many times, you don't have to think about it. Riding
Got
a
it.
bicycle,
Mhm.
driving a car, that's all what we call implicit memory stored in the non-declared. And that can only be stored by repetition. Firing, and what there's a terminology and neuroscience called Hebb's law. that says that nerve cells that fire together, they wire together to make a network. So the only way to really hardwire that is through repetition, constantly firing and wiring that network. So that's why ball mastery is very important. And also because when children do it from a very young age, the more they practice, the better they become. The better they become, the more they want to practice. The more they practice, the better they become. The more they become better, the more fun they have. The more fun they have, the more they want to practice. So it goes around in a loop. And so then football becomes intrinsic, where players, they don't need any outside kind of, encouragement. It's internal. They love to do it because they love it. Kids play with a ball because they believe, number one, they own their own free time, they own their own fun, and they own their own free will. They can do what they want. Nobody's telling them what to do. So that's very, very powerful for children if you understand a little bit of the psychology and the neuroscience behind skill acquisition.
Okay. Thanks for that explanation, because I just wanted to understand, also try to communicate to people as well. Moving on to, I think, the work that you've done in Japan. How did that happen in the first place, Tom? How did you get into coaching in Japan?
Well, I got out of playing, and then I fell in love with Japan, and I wanted to stay here. So I went around to a few of my Japanese friends who were former professional players, had retired. One of them was a national team player. And again, because of my experience in America of working in camps and also what we call these clinics, they're kind of events, of professional players going around and putting on a show. So I wanted to do that and introduce that to Japan. So I got a little bit lucky, and I found a sponsor, Nestle, which have a drink called Milo. It's a kind of a chocolate drink. And I convinced them to sponsor my events. And so I went to them, I convinced them, and that was in 1988. And then in January 1989, I started that year, and I did over 50 events, 50. And so Nestle stuck with me for 10 years. And then so that started my kind of coaching career. But at the time, I didn't really have a philosophy and a methodology. But it wouldn't be until later on that I started realizing and understanding and decided I wanted to be a technical skills coach.
Okay.
And so that was kind of a timeline in 1993 where I made this decision to focus primarily on technical skill development. Okay. And I introduced a program from Europe to Japan that has caught on, and it's impacted and influenced the way that the game is taught or coached and learned here in Japan. And it's made a massive contribution to national teams, both men's and women's, and the professional leagues, both men's and women's as well.
Was this when Couva sort of came about, when you decided to go technical?
Yes. So I introduced the Will Curver business philosophy and methodology to Japan. I found an investor. I created the team, and then I ran it for 15 years. And then I got out of it 15 years ago. It's in the 30th year, but I learned a lot from that. But yeah, I'm known in Japan as the guy who started that. And so, today there's 150 schools throughout Japan, a staff of about 200 full-time employees, 20,000 players any given year, and it's graduated hundreds of thousands of players. And many of them play in the J League, national teams, women's league, national teams, and just everywhere.
Well, you just said that you got out of Curva, and then you started something called T3. What was that about, and what exactly is it?
T3 is just my company. The name T3 stands for Tom-san. Okay. So my name is Tom, and the honorific term in Japan is san. So 3 happens to be the same word, the same pronunciation, san. So we have Tom-san, and then we have the number san. So T3 is a playoff of Tom-san. So that's how I'm known in Japanese football, as Tom-san, because of my TV show, the TV show that I presented a national TV corner every weekday morning for 14 years. And I was always introduced as Tom-san. So that's where the takeoff from it.
What does T3 do? And can you just tell us a bit more about the company?
In the past, it was my management company, which basically takes care of all of my activities, which used to be in the olden days, television, media, right? I published 4 books in Japan. I have published 5 best-selling DVDs, instructional DVDs. I've done over 2,000 events for 500,000 kids, coaches, and parents. I do endless amounts of interviews. I work as a consultant with many governments, many FAs, many professional teams and leagues, many different media partners, many different brands. So T3 is my company of my staff that takes care and looks after all of that.
Okay. Initially, Tom, when you entered Japan, of course, the language barrier is sort of there. And how did you communicate with the locals there? And when did you eventually start sort of learning Japanese and communicating in Japanese?
That's a good question. And it was basically when I retired, when I stopped playing and I decided I wasn't going to be a player anymore, I had to study Japanese, because when you're a player, your language is on the pitch. You communicate. You're there to play. You're not there to tell stories. Of course, you need to have some level of communication with your teammates. But it wasn't until I finished playing, which was in 1988, and then self-study. I've been here for 38 years, so I had to pick up the language. And then, also to just feed myself as well, I needed to be able to communicate. I couldn't do what I was doing through translation. I'm on television shows. I did a lot of live TV shows, so you can't make a mistake on live television. I did that for many years as well. So you've got to be comfortable. You have to be confident. You have to know what you're talking about when you're getting in a room with other experts. So, my kids make fun of my Japanese because obviously they're younger and they're living and they were brought up here and that's their first language. But I do okay.
Okay. Okay. Is it still something that you're learning? Is it a constant sort of learning process, learning Japanese?
There are thousands and thousands of Chinese characters. They call them kanji in Japan. And you can't possibly know them all. So that you're always, but my football instruction and coaching is quite good, but I wouldn't want to sit and debate about economics in Japanese, or maybe some kind of legal lawsuit. It would be difficult for me to do, right? But for my basic business, Japanese, and teaching and communicating and, ordering food and ordering at the restaurant, I'm very good.
What about cultural differences, Tom, from America to Japan? Of course, it's a cultural shift. So, are there any obvious differences that you started off seeing?
Yeah, of course, many different cultures. Okay, first one is Americans value the individual, and the individual is always being taught to stand out. Speak your mind. We have a phrase that says the only dumb question is the question you don't ask. In Japan here, it's upside down. There's a saying in Japanese, ienai kachi. Ienai means don't speak, kachi means you win. So there's another saying that the nail that sticks up, you hammer it down in Japan, because we want everybody to be on the same level. So yeah, the cultural different, it's much different. In America, much more flexible, much more open-minded. Here in Japan, much more closed, much less flexibility, much more rigid, much more organized. Everything runs on time, and so there's much more chaos in America and the West, and there's less chaos here. Okay. So yes, it's a major in the thinking as well, because, America and a lot of European or a lot of countries, we've got multiple nationalities. So we have different cultures, different language, different culture, different food, just different clothing, fashion, music. But here, everybody's basically similar, right? So they don't need to be as explicit in their instructions, because there's more of a cultural understanding, because I'm Japanese and you're Japanese. So there's an understanding because of the thousands of years of history here. Okay. So Japanese say less than Westerners will say. Westerners speak much more than Japanese do. And again, because they're assuming and believing that understanding is taking place. I don't need to tell you every other detail, because you're Japanese. That's the way we do it. That kind of mentality.
Yeah. Coming back to the football, Japan, of course, is now a big team in Asia, a big nation in Asian football. Of course, it's got sort of stamped its authority on world football as well. How does it feel to, sort of see that happen for Japan after working in the grassroots system for so long?
It's been probably the most exhilarating experience I've ever had in my life. When I watched the Japanese national team play, my family, my kids and my wife think I'm nuts because sometimes I'm crying when I watch the games, especially during this past World Cup when we were losing and we came back and beat both Germany and Spain. I was like a little baby crying because I could feel the emotion um, from all of these years I've spent, and I've got kids or boys on the team playing that came to our schools. Number 6, number 8, number 10. These are key positions, and they're contributing and they're scoring goals in front of my eyes.
Mhm.
And emotions get the best of me. I've very rarely felt that emotion in anything else in my life. So one of the great things about sports is you can feel alive. You can feel your heartbeat. You can feel the emotion. You can feel your skin gets kind of, it gets
Yeah,
goosebumps. I even do that now when I'm thinking about it right now. So that's
yeah.
one of the wonderful joys of sport is it's a check to see how alive you really are.
Yeah, I mean, you're just speaking about it. It's giving me goosebumps. Although I'm not really connected to Japan anyway, probably because it's an Asian country. But yeah, I mean, that is what it is, right? I mean, sport is just amazing. Oh, was the ball out of play against Germany for you? Just
Well, with we talking about, well, it's so funny because we all learned a lot, man, and that is that unless if the ball is basically the line is if the ball is hanging on the side like that, it's
Mhm.
in bounds. Nobody knew that. I didn't know that. Even if the ball is completely over the line, if there's a
Yeah,
part
yeah,
of the circumference of the ball, it's in play. I thought that was the most brilliant thing that's ever come out of football, probably since I've been alive. And the thing that people don't understand, which is really interesting, is that VAR, the company that actually operates that is Sony. It's Japanese. And
okay.
it was a company called Hawkeye that was bought. It's an English company in England, but Sony bought Hawkeye. So I just thought it was quite amusing. A lot of people didn't know this. That this Japanese technology from Sony was basically highlighted from a Japanese player in just one of the most controversial, games in the history
Yeah,
of the game because nobody knew the rule. But yeah, it was
yeah,
pretty exciting and interesting moment.
crazy, crazy. Yeah. Any particular favorites for you in the national team right now? Because I have my set of Japanese favorites. I love watching Mitoma every single game week in the Premier League.
Well,
Are there any favorites?
of course, I root for the boys that came up through our program, our
Mhm.
school.
Okay.
So right now we're very lucky because the captain, Endo Wataru,
Mhm.
he's from our schools. So I
Okay.
occasionally chat with him on social media and Twitter. I wish him good luck before his games. We've got,
Nice.
you know, we've got Minamino, who played at
Mhm.
Liverpool, who's now
Yeah.
playing at Monaco, wherever. He's from it. Aditsu Doan, who scored a beautiful goal in the World Cup. And we got Wada Ayase. We got lots of players. I coached the boy Hatate, who occasionally comes in and out. He's at Celtic. So we've got, and those are only the ones that I know about. There's many more. So I tend to obviously, of course, I get excited if one of our boys is in the game and comes in and scores a goal or a game winner or a tying goal in a World Cup match. And then on the girls' side too, lots of players as well. So it's always fun for me to watch anytime the Japan national team plays.
The I think when I was researching and I found Shinji Kagawa's name pop up everywhere. And how was it? Do you remember working with him? And when you saw him play for clubs like Manchester United, Borussia Dortmund,
That's
how did it make you feel?
that's the greatest part of what I do. I
Mhm.
don't even know the players that I affected or that I worked with. This is an interesting story. I never knew about Kagawa. Kagawa told the story about he knew me. So what
Okay.
happened was is that I've been working with Adidas as their football ambassador, as you can tell over my shoulder here, for many, many
Yeah.
years. And one of the guys from Adidas Japan needed to go to Dortmund to fit him for a shoe. And
Mhm.
he just happened to be there, and my name came up. And he goes, "Hey, do you know Tom San?" He goes, "Oh yeah, I watch Tom San on TV." And also, he appeared in some of my events, and I
Okay.
gave him a signed autographed ball with my name on it that he kept. So
Wow.
I didn't even know that I worked with the kid or that I ever interacted with the kid, which is fine. But it just goes to show the depth of all of the kids that we've influenced. It's not just me, it's my staff of coaches that I've had over the
Yeah.
years. It's the TV show, it's the comic book I appeared in, 2 pages every month, 1.3 million copies a month for 14 years. Our DVDs, our books we wrote. So, I've been very fortunate because everywhere you look, whenever I meet professional players, when I go to clubs, sometimes I go to training or I meet them, always I'm going to have a player come up to me and thank me and say, I watched your show. I had your DVD. My mom sent me to your school. So it's obviously very rewarding, very satisfactory. So yeah, so I don't know who the players are until I hear from them ourselves, because nobody knows at those youngest ages, especially because we have so many good players. And that's the thing nowadays with Japan, is that we have this reservoir of great players everywhere here in Japan. The level between the very best playing in Europe and the J League, the gap is very tiny. So that's why Japan is so good right now.
Okay. That's nice to know. Just to touch upon the Indian football scene for a bit, I know you've done a couple of interviews with Indian media channels, and you've looked at Indian football at times. The last one that I came across was one from 2018. Any particular observations that you made around Indian football at the time?
Well, I have been to your wonderful country 3 times. Okay. A lot of people don't know this, but I was one of the first people that the ISL, Indian Super League, interviewed me and flew me to Mumbai, IMG Reliant, I think it's called. And they interviewed me to give me the job of technical director. And I didn't take it because it's not really I'm not a technical director. But anyway, and then I was invited a few other times to speak at some conferences and things. I have some really, really good friends that are coaches there. I have a super deep respect for Indian football. One of the best youth developers that I've ever worked with in the world is a guy named Richard Hood. He's Indian. He's brilliant. I learned a lot from him. And then there's other guys like Dinesh Nair. These guys are very, very good, very top-end coaches and educators. Shaji, who I think is now the general secretary of the FA. So there's a lot of capable people. I still believe, and I haven't given up yet, but I haven't been successful enough to convince people, at least the people that need convincing, that they should develop a strategy, which I believe is football starting at home, that they need to start much younger with the kids and ensuring that the foundation, the basic building blocks for just learning the game are very solid. I don't think we have that in India, but let's see, maybe there's still hope that I can convince some people, but I have unfortunately not been able to get in the right room with the right people. So who knows? Maybe from your interview, someone will see it.
I really hope so. Tom, if there's a message that you just spoke about starting off early, but if there's anything else that you want to tell people around the Indian football system, that sort of this is the direction to go in, what would you say to them?
Yeah, this is exactly what I would say. I would say stop focusing on what's happening in Europe, what's happening in Japan, what's happening in South America. Stop focusing on this fascination and this incredible, always thinking about elite player development. Your treasure in India are the 100 million Indian children that are under the age of 6. That is going to make you world champion someday. It's time to let go of holding the hand of the Europeans or whoever it is, and it's time to start focusing on one thing, man. Basics. Here it is. Here's the national curriculum that can fit on a little napkin. India needs to develop an army of little boys and girls that are skilled at ball mastery by the age of 5 or 6. Then just let them play. And if you do that, that's your treasure. You're sitting on a treasure box that's locked, and you're trying to look for the solution when it's right underneath you. It's there. And that's my parting, best kind of recommendation for Indian football.
Thanks so much, Tom. Just last question for you: what lies ahead for you as a coach, as a clinician, like you just mentioned?
Sure.
What's the plan?
Well, I get really excited by being able to give this information to people,
Okay.
parents, coaches, thought leaders, the ecosystem. There's a big ecosystem out there. So I get excited, and what's in it for me? What am I looking for? I still want to try to do something of impact in India.
Okay.
I've worked a lot in China. Obviously, my work here in Japan has been very recognized. I'm doing a lot of work in my own country as well, in America. But for
Mhm.
me, I've worked in Indonesia as well. So eventually, someday, I hope I'm going to be invited back to India. And I really think that I could help to become the change agent for Indian football.
All right, all right. Thanks so much, Tom, for your time, and I enjoyed this chat thoroughly. And hopefully, we can do it sometime soon again, and hopefully, we can see you soon in India and
Yeah,
help Indian football grow. Thanks so much, Tom.
absolutely. It was a very good interview and very good questions.